All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carolina Navarro. I'm the Deputy Director of HSNY, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our March 2024 lecture. A few announcements before we get started. Okay, so March classes are now live on Eventbrite. We're offering our award-winning classes throughout the month in our classroom here on the 5th floor of the General Society. And our traveling education team will be taking watchmaking on the road and across the pond. So we're going to Washington, D.C., hosted by Tiny Jewel Box. Chicago classes are in April with Oak and Oscar, and then we're returning to London on April 20th with Philips. And tickets are available on our website. Okay. So as you can see, our 2024 gala is sold out. We're looking forward to getting all dressed up and celebrating 158 years of New York's horological tradition and toasting to the year's accomplishments, including awarding financial aid to watchmaking students. For those of you with a ticket, we look forward to welcoming you on April 6th. And if you want, you can join the wait list and learn more about the gala on our website. Okay, and on the topic of financial aid, our financial aid window is now closed. This year, HSNY offered students and schools 9 financial aid opportunities, including the new Andre Bibo Scholarship for Veterans. We received 63 applications, which is a record for HSNY. And this is really important. 63 application means that the majority of students currently studying to become watchmakers in the United States applied, and we're one step closer to ensuring the success of each and every watchmaking student in the country. Okay, and now on to our lecture. So fashion and horology have been closely linked since the beginning of time, and both can be viewed as expressions of style. Many of you know New York Fashion Week wrapped last month, and Fashion Week is coming to a close in Europe as we speak. Today, we're lucky to have Hodinkee's very own style editor here to lecture on making the link between fashion and watch collecting. Please join me in welcoming Malaika Crawford to the podium.
Hi. Am I allowed to swear? Hi, guys. I'm actually quite nervous tonight, but thank you for coming. Where do I start? Okay, I promise myself that I'm not going to do any self-deprecation this evening, even though I'm English, not Australian. Just a little note for everyone, in case you're wondering. So no self-deprecation, and I just wanted to start by saying thanks to Nick and Caroline for having me. Very kind of you guys to bring me into the fold and to go a little left field. Trust me to be left field. And also, I just wanted to let everybody know that I started my path to horology right here in this building, doing 101 through 103. And I would, yes, thanks. And I would recommend it. It's pretty good, and Steve's great, and you'll learn a lot, and yeah, that's that. Okay, so let's get started. That's my laser. Okay, does this work? It's not really working, but I'll just, oh, here we go. So obviously I'm starting with a slide of Serpenti because I have an unwavering allegiance to the Bulgari Serpenti. But this is really just to illustrate kind of how I perceive watches and how it's really about an intersection of jewelry and watches, and how watches, to me at least, are more about an expression of style, but also an expression of identity. And I think Fabrizio from Bulgari once told me that the Serpenti was a piece of jewelry with a watch attached to it. So I will always remember that. Let's go back to, oh God, okay, this is gonna be, here we go, my 2 ladies, because this is where it all starts. This is where we start to understand fashion as, ornamentation, watches as ornamentation. We've got Queen Elizabeth I on the left here. I don't actually have a picture of her wearing a watch, but apparently, according to the books, she did wear one. She was the first person to wear one in the 16th century. It's quite a long time ago. And then I have this image of Queen Victoria on the right, which is one of those images that if you went to school in England has been forever emblazoned and imprinted onto your memory, for better or for worse. She also had a powder blue Patek pocket watch that I think she wore on a chain. According to my good friend Michael Friedman, who has spent many hours talking me off a ledge on the phone and telling me that people do want to know about watches and fashion, don't worry, you've got this. Queen Anne, during her coronation, was wearing 2 watches on her waist, which I suppose means that was kind of the Renaissance double wristing, or whatever you want to call it. But she was doing it back in the day. And obviously, this girl crew was also into watches. Who have we got next? Let's see. Oh, my God. I have 70 slides to get through, so I'm going to have to learn how to work this thing. Okay, hang on. Here we go. Okay, Caroline Murat, or Caroline, whatever you want to call her, on the left. She's into Breguet. This is the first wristwatch made for ladies by Patek Philippe, 1868. Pretty cool. This is Queen Vicky's Patek Philippe pocket watch on the right-hand side. So this is just a bit of context for you, because I'm going to keep this lecture in the 20th century. And I should probably start by sort of defining what the word fashion means to me. I don't know what it means to you, but I'd like you to keep this sort of positive in your mind and leave any, ill thoughts at the door. Because to me, what's so special about fashion and why I think it really sort of parlays into the watch space is that it's all about ornamentation, it's all about self-expression, but fashion has this crazy ability to touch upon what's in the air and make it tangible in a way that I feel like the watch space hasn't really quite caught up on. So some may call it frivolous, some may call it vacuous. I actually think that frivolity works in its favor because it keeps things flexible, it keeps things moldable, and it keeps the conversation moving forward. That's a line that I use pretty much 90% of the time I write a Hodinkee article. Keep the conversation moving forward, not backwards. Okay, so this is the 20s, obviously Coco Chanel. The 20s is cool because it's the beginning of Art Deco, and fashion is completely changing. And there are a lot of parallels between Art Deco and the 60s. So it's like roaring 20s, swinging 60s, fashion is changing, youth culture is kind of becoming more important. I would say that this is where formality in society really starts to break down. And Miss Coco Chanel, despite her weird political whatever, we won't talk about that, but she is liberating women. She's changing the shape of, silhouettes. She's bringing the rise of costume jewelry, which would have been massively frowned upon earlier in the century. And she's also bringing Chanel No. 5, which is, to me, sort of the most classic Art Deco shape because it's very geometric. We've got a Poiret opera coat on the left-hand side, which I just threw in for fun. But really, it's about this idea of watches as jewelry for men and for women. And it's really about reflecting that Art Deco sort of motif and geometry. And I think Art Deco has now become one of those things that is just, it cuts through the style timeline. It's really timeless. If you go to any auction, Sotheby's, Christie's, and you take a little look at the jewelry lots, there's always going to be a Cartier Art Deco bracelet because for some reason that is timeless and that's what you should be collecting. And I will make a little parallel about that and the Royal Oak in 50 slides. So. Okay, more 20s fashion. I got to speed this up. Okay, yes, Cartier. We love Cartier. 1920s. We love a tank à guichet, a tank normal. It's looking very jewelry, even though it's for men. This sort of idea that actually the watch space is kind of a pretty modern concept, right? I feel like, don't come for me, but watches really kind of became its own industry, I would say like no more than 20 years ago, because really watches were always thought of as living under this larger bracket of jewelry. And another little fun fact that my friend Michael Friedman told me is that watches were always retailed by jewelers. So if you just put two and two together there, that's why people love a Tiffany stamped dial. So yeah, that a watch retailer is sort of a modern concept. So that really put things into perspective for me. There we have a nice little catalog image provided to me by one of my colleagues, because I would never be able to find something like this. And it is watches from the late 40s, which kind of makes sense here. I'm about to tell you something that happens quite often in the fashion zeitgeist. This is Dior's new look in the 40s. We're post-war. I jumped like 2 decades, but I think it's kind of what we need to do. And then we've got a Jaeger LeCoultre catalogue image on the left. So what happens in fashion is that trends come and they go, but really it's just a cycle. And it's sort of like, this isn't really something that's set in stone, but it happens quite often whereby there's a 30-year period of consumer becoming creator. And what we can really see here is there's that slim jewelry, like Art Deco aesthetic coming back in the 50s. People are trying to basically emulate what their mothers were wearing, and we've gone back to that cocktail watch, slimline look. Maybe we've regressed a little in the fashion department because we're now doing sort of tiny, tiny waist and big, big skirt, but that's okay because the 60s is coming. Here we are. That is Jackie Kennedy, and that is her sister Lee, very topical for those of you watching the Swans at the moment. And then on the right-hand side, we have the sort of very famous YSL Mondrian-inspired dress. And to me, this is like the most 60s it gets. And the reason why I did this parallel between the 20s and the 60s is because, again, swinging 60s, we've got this like real rise in youth culture, and then we see color really coming to the foreground here, which is important in watchmaking. Here we are, that's Twiggy on the left. If you don't know her, she's a British icon. And she's wearing, I don't know what those watches are, but they're pretty cool, and I don't know what those gloves are either. And then we have the introduction of color here through sort of more of a, I don't know, I don't like the word masculine, but we're bringing color into the mainstream with the skipper. Here's Mary Quant and her little gang of models, which is giving you that 60s vibe. And then here is the man himself, Mick Jagger, swinging 60s, looking pretty good, if I do say so myself. He's wearing a Hoya on the right-hand side, and then he's wearing this kind of funny brand that was introduced to me by my friend Nick Sullivan, an English brand that made really big plastic watches, but I feel like pretty kind of in line with the look of the times. Yeah, Ben Clymer called it pedestrian. Think of it what you will. Defines that era. Need I say more? We all know this watch. I like this one a little bit more, maybe. Okay. Who would have thought Julia Fox would make it to HSNY? We have got Twiggy on the left, and I just wanted to, I mean, how could I not? I wanted to bring Julia. Julia. Listen, trends just come back around. There's no avoiding it. And here I am proving myself right. Okay. Next. Oh my God, this isn't. Okay. Oh my God. Yes. Again, topical. Truman Capote on the cover of Interview, wearing a pebble. Bryn, can you believe it? We love this. We're in the 70s. It's 1972. Things are a little bit more vibrant. Pop aesthetic. Andy Warhol, I don't know where he is. He's probably coming up here. Oh, this is an interesting one. I don't know if anybody has seen this very esoteric film that my friend Melissa told me not to mention in this presentation, but it's called Who Are You, Polly McGoo? And it's basically a satire by William Klein about the fashion industry. And it's this whole sort of joke about Paco Rabanne staging this show and Diana Vreeland's in the audience and he's making dresses out of sheet metal and everybody's like, what the hell is going on? And then everybody sort of claps in the end and is like, this is amazing, this is so revolutionary. So actually, I think Paco had a bit of an influence on everything that was going on here, including Birth of an Icon, 1972, Royal Oak. So back to my point about Art Deco and the Royal Oak. I actually think this is super interesting if you really think about the design of the Royal Oak and how it's become sort of such a timeless, piece of, I don't know, like watch ephemera. It's cut in a way that makes it faceted, right? It's like almost cut in a way that makes it kind of Art Deco. It's kind of like you can spot it from across the room, and it by dint of that sort of cuts through the timeline. And so does, well, I'm not sure if this Paco cuts through the timeline, but I think that was sort of the inspiration of this sort of look in watches in the 70s. It's really interesting as well to kind of see how these things were totally a product of their time. It kind of blew my mind when I figured this out, but here we are. And then these famous Pierre Cardin, famous for the watch crowd, Pierre Cardin watches, kind of, I don't know, it's not in chronological order, but you kind of are getting that retro-futuristic vibe. You're getting the Courage, the Pierre Cardin. Like, it's all overlapping and intermingling, and it's kind of all coming from the same place, guys. Peacock Revolution, Mick Jagger on the left, George Harrison on the right, and Grima for Omega, making watches that are totally in line with what's going on in the time, or at the time. Kind of a different approach to watches, I would say. I totally forgot to talk about Rolex Professional that came at the end of the 50s, which kind of feels like in diametric contrast to this, right? So we've established what a tool watch looks like, and then something weird happened in the 60s, and now we're making watches that look sort of insane, but very cool nonetheless. Let's move on to get through these 70 slides. Okay, love this. This is more Grima on the left and some Saint Laurent sort of quite interesting imagery on the right. Because how could you forget the sort of vibe of the 70s? The 70s was one of those eras where everything that was underground kind of became above ground. Like everything that was planted in the 60s came to life in the 70s. It was, I know a lot of people hate this word, but everything became quite fluid. And it was really about, fashion designers becoming social figures in society and really steering the way for, mass popular culture. I mean, that perfume was pretty big deal stuff. So let's take a look at who was, yes, here we go. Karl Lagerfeld, who was a big watch collector, sort of, I think so, whatever. He was a leader of the times. There's Gerald Genter sketching some elephants. I don't really know what he's doing. But these are kind of like, the leaders of their category. Let's see if I can fast forward here. Okay, yeah, here we go. Saint Laurent on the right, wearing a must. Kind of interesting. And Andy Warhol on the left, who never set his watch, but we all know that story. And so there's kind of this rivalry going on in the 70s between Saint Laurent and Karl Lagerfeld. So you're sort of in one of the two camps. But these guys are basically dictating everything that happens in fashion. And in the 60s, Saint Laurent sort of changes the whole consumer chain and opens Rive Gauche, which is sort of the beginning of ready-to-wear. And we're seeing that, again, breaking down of formality in fashion. And so now we've moved from, well, we still have couture, but we've moved into ready-to-wear. And we've got Andy here, who, that's quite a scary picture, but he is kind of leading the scene in New York, and Saint Laurent is leading the scene in Paris along with Carl, but Carl gets his moment a little bit later. So here on the right, we have Lulu de la Falaise, and on the left, we have Saint Laurent with his, again, Lulu and Betty Catrou, who are like basically his muses. And we start to see parallels between Saint Laurent's fashion and kind of the watches that were being created. Something I learned recently, actually, is that Piaget used to send their jewelry designers to Paris to go and see the collection so that they could take inspiration and make sure that their watch designs were relevant. Who would have thought that anybody would do something like that? Okay, so we have Saint Laurent's famous opera collection here, and then I can't remember who that is, but that's Piaget. And what we start to see is this real, well, I'm not going to call it a dialogue, but I'm going to call it a byproduct of the use of color, again, but also this real leaning on like nature as inspiration, texture, stone dials. This is the 70s. Everybody's getting a little bit weird, but everything is, you know, very sort of sensual. And, you know, it's, I mean, I can see the parallels. I'm not sure if you can, but I can. Here we go again. This is Saint Laurent's villa in Marrakesh and some Grima watches on the left. So I really feel that makes a lot of sense. And then we have Liza, my favorite, wearing a bone cuff, which I think really symbolizes this move towards a kind of, again, it's inspired by nature, but it's a little bit more graphic. It's sort of bone-like. And then we've got this Chopard example in the middle, and then the now made famous by a certain watch celebrity who I will not name, the bamboo coussin on the right. But you can really obviously see the clear design language kind of, I think it's obvious, but maybe it's not, I don't know. Okay, this is Diana Vreeland saying some important things about style in the 70s. And then back to Liza, and I think you can really see the link here. Well, whatever, there is a conversation going on. Brooke Shields, this is to denote the beginning of the 80s, where things get a little bit different. Here we go. Grace Jones on the left, and the world's most insane Alain Mickley sunglasses on the right. Because this is the era of disco, and this is the era of complete crazy behavior, and everybody has left Paris and gone back to New York, and they're all at Studio 54. And it is the birth of the rainbow, guys. Big deal. And it's all about gem setting and being kind of flashy, but it doesn't matter because it's the 80s and we can do what we want until Ian Schrager goes to jail. Okay, Rolex. This is the only Rolex reference I know off by heart. That's not true if Ben is in the audience. But it's my favorite for sure, and we're kind of getting that 80s flashy vibe here. Chanel, Première, we can feel Karl Lagerfeld looming. This is kind of an important watch, I'm gonna say. Yeah, it's quartz, but it's sort of that apex of fashion watch, and you know, we're doing the beginning of Chanel watchmaking here, and it was a very, very popular timepiece, I will say. In contrast, we have this slightly more accessible Tag Heuer Formula One, a popular watch from the 80s, and this is now the beginning of not the quartz crisis, the quartz era. because it was not a crisis in Japan. And then we have Keith Haring doing his Swatch thing. I didn't really have much to say about Swatch, but we can come back to that. I'm here for Swatch, but I have too many slides to get through. Okay, so now we're back to New York, and we are arriving at the beginning of the hip-hop era. By the way, it's really hard to encapsulate every single thing that happened in fashion in the 20th century. So if you feel like important things were left out, I'm sorry, but I can't do it all. So this is Salt and Pepper here. This is, I don't really know what this might be a Gucci watch, but whatever, they're like downtown. It's a vibe, it's the Lower East Side. It's New York in the 80s. Pretty scary. Oh, Eric B. and Rakim wearing giant gold chains. So everybody knows that I love talking about hip hop, and everybody sort of gets quite scared when I start talking about it. But it is kind of important to think about in the context of watchmaking, because this really is America's largest cultural export, right? So it doesn't really matter whether you like the music or not. It's infiltrated pretty much every corner of culture imaginable. And the whole story goes back to the 80s, and it goes back, well, actually it goes back to the 70s, but it's gonna start to become a thing in the 80s. Oh, I think I took out my slide of LL Cool J, but whatever, it's fine. We'll talk about what happens to you if you're a rapper and you kind of come into your, I don't know, deal with your label, and you're on your come up, and your A&R decides to, first of all, take you to Dapper Dan to get your tracksuit or your hookup suit, Melissa, wherever you are. And Dapper Dan, genius, is bringing logomania into the mainstream. He is taking kind of the codes of these big houses illegally, but nobody cares. And he is starting the beginning of remix culture. So let's just keep that in our minds. And if you are Biggie, you are first off going to Tito to get your Jesus chain, and then maybe later you're going to Jacob. I don't know what you're getting at Jacob, but there he is. Some more New York in the 80s. No, that's 90s, that's Ice Cube. Oops. This ring, we love this ring. This, to me, denotes the beginning of the way media is kind of fed to us as a society, right? I had this very interesting conversation the other night where I was thinking about the way MTV kind of pushed culture on us in a way. So we now are consuming via Instagram, and everything goes very quickly, and we're very saturated. But if you think about the 90s, we were kind of being fed the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. It was like repetition. You remember every single music video from the 90s, including many Hype Williams videos, which kind of, first of all, MTV, they weren't so into the hip-hop thing, and it took kind of a while for them to get on board. But it was like people like June Ambrose and Hype Williams who kind of changed the aesthetic and brought it to mainstream. Here we are. This is a picture of Madonna. I think this is Anna Wintour's first ever celebrity cover. So this is kind of just denoting the fact that we're now entering the celebrity age. This is a cute picture that I pulled from Dime Piece. Okay, here we are now. Questionable man. Questionable man. But I kind of have a soft spot for this man, I'm sorry. Changed everything, and now we're looking at Linda Evangelista basically wearing what Salt and Pepper were wearing on the Lower East Side. But this is a good thing. This is the 90s. This is like not strictly appropriation. This is bringing hip-hop kind of into the mainstream. We've got Naomi, and we've got Carl totally ripping up the codes of Chanel and putting jeans on the runway and being absolutely insane. But the reason why Carl is so important, and I feel like I haven't spoken about watches in maybe 20 minutes, but that's okay, we'll come back to it. is because he is focusing on Chanel's codes, but he's not beholden to its history. Like, he's faithful to it, but he's keeping things moving, and he's getting people interested in Chanel again. 90s aesthetic, not as interesting as Carl. This is where we were with watches in the 90s. Sorry. Carolyn Bessette on the right, looking flawless. Margiela. Okay, this is good. This is important. Margiela for Hermes. Oh, God, what year was this? This was in the 90s, but can't remember what year. Kind of also an important watch that I feel like doesn't get enough love or respect. And this man, Margiela, who was kind of like this anonymous figure, turned this watch into a pretty big deal by adding two, what we call a double tour, a double strap. And he kind of did all these like really cool, genius things by like deconstructing parts of Hermes that are so synonymous to the brand and just like making them cool. Gwyneth in her Panther and some cool 90s things. Okay, I put this in for the watch nerds because there's Michael Jordan wearing a datograph, just to say that we were already thinking about high watchmaking before you even clocked that we were thinking about high watchmaking. Another slide to prove my point here. Pharrell, the best, okay? And we can't forget about the sidekick here. Okay, controversial, I know, I'm sorry. But it's important in the timeline. So here we have Pharrell and Nigo. Did you know that they were introduced by Jacob the jeweler? Because I didn't. I thought that was pretty prolific. And this is the beginning. Well, no, actually, it's not the beginning. This is kind of the evolution of the Slick Rick bust-down Rolex into Pharrell kind of doing this genius thing and making a G-Shock into a bust-down. And then everybody knows my affinity for the 5 times in, a very important watch for the culture. And again, along with sort of going to, I don't know, maybe we've moved slightly past Dapper Dan at this point, but you're going to Jacob to get your kind of celebratory watch, and you've made it. And we've got Nigo and Pharrell kind of changing the sort of what's cool for men to be wearing. Actually, I have somebody sitting in the audience who kind of is keeping that same energy going, but I'm not going to point her out. But it's like men wearing colored gemstones and men wearing platinum as opposed to yellow gold. It's kind of changing the landscape, and the watches are matching that. And the 5 time zone was actually kind of the beginning of this like hip hop relationship to watchmaking. And okay, we can sort of argue that it wasn't the finest of movements, but it was pretty important when it came to people kind of getting into that watch fold and starting their slippery slope of an obsession. And everybody wore it. Absolutely everybody wore it. There are pictures of everybody wearing it, including David Beckham, Giselle, you name it, everybody was wearing this watch. And actually, people were buying knockoffs of this watch, and a lot of people got in touch with me after I wrote that article and said that they had a knockoff, and I got a lot of pictures of people in high school wearing a knockoff 5 times in, which I thought was quite cool. Here we are, Jacob, Nigo, Pharrell. Same old. Yes. So if you want to know, were people really wearing the 5 times in? I say more? Hang on, where's my, oh, no, I've gone back. Here we go. That is pretty obvious to me what's going on here. And Lil Wayne just for good measure, because why not? Okay, so now I start to get really controversial. People are going to hate this. So this is a Royal Oak Offshore gem set. And just so you know, I have spoken to people at AP's Heritage Department about this before you start fact-checking me. But this was basically Switzerland's way. I mean, it was obviously not everything was about this dialogue with 47th Street, but this was basically Switzerland's way of saying, okay, I've seen you, we see you, we now know what the consumer wants, and we're going to do it the Swiss way. We're going to gem set in Le Brassus, and we're going to make it really legit. And this watch is like 47 millimeters or something insane like that. It's pretty cool. You can see it at the AP Museum. Such a good picture. This is Lil' Kim. I have no idea what watch she's wearing. This is, obviously you know who this is, and this is a yellow offshore. Pretty cool. And then on the right, we have Jay, and he's wearing his now very famous 10th anniversary Jay-Z limited edition offshore, which set the way for a lot of sort of watch culture that we see today. I've told that story many times. I do not need to tell it again. Okay, this is kind of a cool slide. Let's get back to comparing fashion and watches, because on the left, we have this very traditional Frank Muller. It's actually quite an attractive watch. And then on the right, I don't really know what happened. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were like, you know, the watch industry hasn't really picked up on this idea of chasing irony in the way that fashion has. Like, fashion does this very annoying thing. I don't know, maybe it's annoying, maybe it's just kind of what's in trend, but it does this thing where it's like kind of jokes on you. Like if you're buying Demna for Balenciaga, joke is kind of on you, and you're kind of self-aware and you're kind of cognizant of what you're doing. I just still don't know if the Swiss watch industry is in on the joke here, but I don't know, it's up for debate. So this is kind of a nice way of demonstrating how I think there's a real sort of lack of maybe, I don't know, I'm not hating, I'm just saying that the two are very different, and that I think fashion takes itself a lot less seriously than we realize. Can't believe I put this in my slideshow. That is a Panerai, and it looks really good on Marc Jacobs' wrist. And then these are some of my favorite offshores because it's the 90s here. Okay, today. We're already at today. Finally, I can't believe that was 70 slides. Okay, we have Timmy in the ladies crash, yes. Ooh, ladies crash. Diamond crash. We've got Benoit Babe, Catherine Deneuve here, which is kind of like, I think, the look that a lot of people are going for right now. This, shout out to my bangle watch here. Here we go. I had to include this. Why not? Lil Uzi at HSNY. First time ever. This is where we're at today with watchmaking, guys. And that's cool, and I am cool with it, because you know what? Lil Uzi is cool with it too. And then, to me, this is really where we come full circle, right? So if we think about the future of watches, and this gets quite complicated because Pharrell's kind of role in culture right now is it's a hot topic, but he is at the helm of Vuitton menswear, and he's, you know, wearing RMs, and he is really in the middle of culture, and he is making it happen. And it just shows you that you can have this kind of creative mind that is thinking across genres, is thinking about watches, is thinking about fashion, and is kind of in on the irony, hence the bonbon, which is, I think his wife owns that watch. And then obviously shout out to Tyler, because this is very zeitgeisty. And then I think, guys, I think we might have made it through the show. So, some concluding thoughts, because you don't get off that quickly. Sorry. If I want to just say a few things, okay. I really want everybody to take away from this little talk that could have been 5 hours long, but I tried to keep it short for you. Defining moments and decades that have shaped watch culture. And while the sort of ripples and interactions might not be obvious, I think we can really look to our relationship with imagery in fashion as sort of like an inspirational guiding force to how we relate to watches. And just again to repeat that I am honored to be speaking here tonight, and I have the utmost respect for everybody who has come before me. But I think it's interesting for us to think a little bit outside of the box, think about how we're consuming, think about how we'd like to consume in the future, think about intentional design, think about the idea of having people at the helm of brands whose names we know, who maybe could help us develop this more human connection to watches. And really, that's it from me. Thank you.
Alrighty. Awesome. Malaika, thank you so much for your lecture. It looks like something that my Instagram algorithm spits out, so I'm here for it. If anyone,
a really long time to make that.
if anyone has any questions, raise your hand and I'll come to you with the mic.
Thank you for the lecture. I'm not as well cultured on fashion, so any opportunity to just learn about that world.
Great.
So you kind of mentioned, sort of like early on, like a 30-year period where consumers eventually become creators, and then you kind of referenced, timeless designs, right? Like we all have the iconic watch designs, like the Royal Oak, minimal changes, the Speedmaster, minimal changes, Rolex as a brand itself, minimal changes. But I can't seem to think of that similar examples within fashion, right? Because when we go from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s to the 50s and to the 60s, so I guess my first question would be, could you elaborate more on what would be an equivalent timeless design from a fashion perspective, whether it be like a product or the use of a material, any type of, outfits, just something like that. Thank you.
I think I mentioned earlier this parallel between 20s and 60s. But I mean, I feel like this is kind of proof enough, right? Timeless design. Blue jeans, we all wear them. We've all been wearing them. I think fashion is a little bit different to watches, right? Because if you think about this dichotomy of permanence and obsolescence, when we're making jewelry and watches, we're really looking to make something that stands the test of time. And when we're looking at fashion, I mean, I know everybody's really on this vintage train and sustainability, and I'm all with that. But I think this idea that fashion is kind of a little bit more, it changes, it morphs, it moves, it keeps on going. And I think jewelry and watches, the idea is to kind of keep the timeline running steadily through all of this change.
Okay, anyone else with a question? We're here.
Hi, thanks. I was curious about your perspective. So you showed a lot of variety in not just the fashion, obviously, but the watches as well. Is your feeling that that same variety exists now? It seems like there's a lot of homogenization when it comes to watch taste, et cetera. So what's your perspective on the modern state, like the current state of affairs when it comes to watch trends? And are there particular brands that are doing more interesting sort of daring things versus what we might see on our Instagram feeds or in watch magazines, et cetera?
Oh, I love this question. It's so good. The modern watch landscape is a tough one. But it really depends on where you're coming from, right? I think in terms of brands today who are trying a little bit harder to be different, it's definitely brands who are on the whole maybe thinking from the outside in Cartier is the most obvious example to me. But I mean, we've seen sort of peaks of Cartier throughout time. I would say, honestly, it's the jewelry brands that are doing the majority of the design work. For me, I like stay faithful to the Serpenti, but I would also say that AP in their partnerships with jewelry designers like Carolina Bucci, they're really kind of pushing that forward too, and they're keeping, obviously it's AP, their mechanical integrity intact. But I would say that there is a real lack of variety in the modern watch space, and it's become part of this industrial luxury complex, and everything belongs to a holding group, and we need more creative minds in the industry, and that seems very obvious to me, but yeah.
All right, question over here.
Do you think that watches and jewelry, even larger than that, tend to be more conservative in their evolution because they're so expensive? And so even if you have a small percentage of people who are more adventuresome, most of the market, you know, doesn't want to spend that much money on something that's going to look really weird in 5 years.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Totally. I mean, look, let's be honest. The kind of luxury watch and jewelry market is available to a very sort of small amount of people. But I do think, yes, that does make sense. If I was checking my balance sheet, I too would probably stick to quite conservative design. But I think it's this idea of maybe offering a variety, sort of knowing who your general consumer is, but also understanding that there are people there who are slightly more adventurous. Actually, Rolex kind of does a good job of that. It's like, you know who your weird customers are, and you got to cater to them too. But I think it's less about, you know, fashion can be really expensive also, and you got to come at it from the approach of like, I'm investing in something that hopefully I will have for years. I'm wearing something that makes me happy. But I would say that, honestly, if you look at all the jewelry brands, they're kind of doing crazy things too. So I don't know if that argument always rings true. And kind of, if you go shopping in any department store today, I guarantee you will be horrified by the prices of anything. So I don't know if fashion is that far off from the price of watches and jewelry right now, to be quite frank.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Your burning fashion questions, watch questions? We have one over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you think that perhaps like change could come like from the big watch brands, like in the form of like what we're seeing right now, and how like independent brands like your work or MBMF or MBMF or the other brand that's name I'm blanking on, that has like those cool hands and like all those circles. Renaissance, yeah, like Renaissance, like those are kind of brands that really experiment with like how we tell time. And so I'm wondering, like, do you think that there should be a shift from like the big brands that try to question how we tell time to sort of push the watch space more further ahead than where it is now, or do you think it's purely design based?
So I think MBNF is such a great example of how being very human is so appealing. And I think the beauty in that brand is like the sort of familial approach. I mean, it is like extremely expensive watchmaking. And it is very avant-garde. And it's kind of, it can afford to take risks in a way that I'm not sure other big brands could, but I do think there are sort of lessons to be learned there. And actually, a watch does come to mind that was made for Balenciaga by my friend Charlotte in the 2000s, which was like the most insane-looking jumping hours, Swiss-made, weird fashion watch that I think people had an appetite for. And honestly, I'm of the sort of belief that build and they will come.
Question up here.
Hi, I'm hoping I can get you to speak about people wearing tool watches in formal settings and how the original design of the watch no longer has any bearing on how it's worn.
That is a good question. It's a hot topic. And I feel like I've said some shady things in the past. I'm sorry. No shade. Look, just, I think, wear what you want to wear, but please, when you're wearing a tux, I don't know, maybe think about something a little bit slimmer. But it doesn't really matter, does it? If you want to wear your GMT on the red carpet, I don't know if anyone's going red carpet, but let's say at the HSNY gala in a month's time, if you want to do you and wear your sort of Pepsi or Batman, be my guest. I think we've sort of eclipsed that idea of rules and formality. But I would say maybe try something a little slimmer in profile. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Thanks. How did the quartz crisis affect watches and fashion?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think it really opened up the doors to brands like Chanel and brands like Saint Laurent and obviously brands like Swatch, and kind of opened up the consumer sort of space into something a lot bigger. And you saw a lot of these brands getting licensing agreements and kind of turning out these crazy watches that I now have a deep affinity for. And the Premiere became such a big watch, and I think sort of with that momentum then led Chanel into this much bigger watch explosion with the J12. But I think it was a real democratization of watch consumption. And it's like we may sort of scoff and laugh at some of those, well, you like to call them mall watches, but some of those watches I think are like my favorite designs from that era.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Malaika. Right now in watchmaking, independent watchmakers are very popular. You know, one person in a workshop making just a handful of watches per year.
Am I getting a question from Nick Manousis?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
who are the parallels in the fashion industry?
Oh, this is a good question, Nick. Okay, so I like to think about this a lot, and a lot of people don't like Pharrell being at the helm of Vuitton because they think it's a waste of sort of the more obvious talent by virtue of people like Martine Rose and Grace Wells Bonner, who sort of work tirelessly. Actually, there's a very good article in the New York Times about this brand in New York called Puppets and Puppets that had to pack up their bag and say goodbye to the New York Fashion Week calendar because there's just no money in it for them. But I would say, even though all these brands are kind of shutting up shop, the most obvious parallels to me are, I mean, J.W. Anderson's a big brand, but he's doing very sort of intellectual things. And then I would say like a Martine Rose, and then I would say, yeah, a Wales Bonner. And people are truly dedicated in their fandom to these brands. And it's kind of cool to see the support. And we really hope to see somebody like that kind of eclipsing this cultural wave of celebrity and making it to the top eventually. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you so much. I think Malaika is going to stick around for a little bit if you have any other questions, but let's give her another round of applause.